everyone, what's up? My name is Joss and welcome back to my channel, Squibbles Reads. Today I'm going to be doing a very large book haul of all the books that I've been accumulating over the past few months, and trust me, there are a lot of them. So if you guys are interested in seeing what books I have acquired, then just keep watching. The first few books that I'm going to show you guys were very kindly gifted to me by Russell over at Ink and Paper Blog. He had a few extra copies and he was like, do you want these? And I was like, hell yes, I want them. And the first book I'm so excited about because we actually just heard a few minutes ago that this book has won the National Book Award for Fiction. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. This is Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This is a Book of the Month copy. This is about a boy named Jojo. He is biracial and he has a sister named Kayla. Their mom, Leonie, does suffer from a drug addiction, so they live with their grandparents. And Leonie has just learned that her husband has been released from prison. So they live on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, but Leonie packs up the kids into a car and they drive off somewhere. If you guys haven't heard of Jesmyn Ward before, she also wrote a novel called Salvage the Bones. This one just won the National Book Awards, so I really need to get into this. And the next book that I'm going to show you guys is called Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. This is by Jeanette Winterson, who also wrote a couple more things, but I have not read any of her works yet. And this is basically kind of like an autobiographical work based on her own coming out, being raised in a very religious family. Russell is also the coolest person in the whole world because I also have Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This is her debut short story collection, and it mainly talks about the ways that women's bodies are viewed and objectified and violence that is put upon women's bodies. So for example, there is a story about a store clerk in a mall that finds a really gruesome discovery in a prom dress. There is also another story where a woman is going through all of her sexual encounters while the place that she lives in, the people there are being infected and are dying from the plague. And there is also a novella in here that is kind of like a reconstructed Law and Order SVU, except she incorporates paranormal and horror elements like A Girl with Bells for Eyes. There are ghosts. There are doppelgangers. This sounds exactly like the creepy commentary fabulous fiction that I need in my life. The next book that I have here is Lucky Boy by Shanti Sekron. This is about a girl named Solimar Castro Valdez, and she's just crossed the border from Mexico into the US, and she's landed on her cousin's doorstep who lives in Northern California. Solimar is also pregnant, so she is grappling with her pregnancy, moving to a new place, trying to adapt into a new family and dealing with motherhood. Then on the other hand, we have Kavya Reddy. She is in her mid-30s. She's a chef at a sorority house at UC Berkeley, and she and her husband, Rishi, are struggling to get pregnant. Somehow, Solimar's baby, her infant son, ends up in the care of Kavya and Rishi while Soli is being detained, and then the story will take off from there. The next book that I have is an arc of one of my most anticipated releases of 2018, and that is called Mouths Don't Speak by Katya Ulysses. There was an earthquake in Haiti in the year 2010 that took so many lives, and a lot of people were left without their homes. Our protagonist's name is Jacqueline, and she lives 3,000 miles away from Haiti, so really far away. However, all of her ancestry comes from Haiti. Her husband is a former US Marine that has been diagnosed with PTSD, and her daughter is 3 years old. So Jacqueline learns that her parents are missing and she presumes that they are dead, so she travels back to Haiti to kind of unravel what happened to them, if they're okay, if they've lost their home, but she really does think that they have died in this earthquake. And the next book I have is called Unkindness of Ghost by Rivers Solomon. This does say that it is an arc on it, but it came out about a month ago, I believe. But this is sci-fi. It is set on a giant ship that has been traveling for about 1,000 years, and on the ship, the different decks of the ship are divided into a social hierarchy that is based on race and class and socioeconomic status and gender. So there is talk about all of those things in this book, in a sci-fi book, on this big spaceship. And each deck on the ship has its own culture, its own language. Our main character's name is Aster. There are threats of war. There is a lot of political tension that is based on power and privilege, which is really reminiscent of our society today. I also have another short story collection that's called Kiss Me Someone by Karen Shepard. Russell bought this for himself when we went book shopping the other day. This short story collection is all about women who are between phases or transition periods in their life. So for example, a woman is between adolescence and adulthood. There's another one that kind of toes the line between selfishness and compassion, and another one that toes the line between stability and uncertainty. So all different phases in their lives. There's talk about sex and sexuality. There is a biracial character and characters of different socioeconomic status that also discuss power and privilege. The next book that I have is by a Canadian author called Heather O'Neill. This is The Lonely Hearts Hotel. This is actually on the short list for the Reading Women Podcast Award, which is run by Kendra and Autumn. I will leave the video where Kendra describes the short list down below. But this is kind of a circus type story about two people. They're babies. They've been abandoned in Montreal in the year 1910. One of them's name is Pierrot, and he is a piano prodigy, and another one's name is Rose, and she's wonderful at dancing and in comedy, and they have this plan to create this circus and this traveling performing arts troupe together. However, we fast forward a little bit, and they are sent off to work as servants in the Great Depression era, but they do reunite after all of these years, and they want to make that dream of the traveling performing arts troupe come true, so this is their story. I also have The Impossible Fairy Tale by Han Yu-ju. This is a book that I included in my most anticipated releases for the first quarter of 2017, and this book is about a bunch of school children that go to school together. There's one girl whose name is Mia, and she's been really spoiled by her mom and her two fathers. They basically give her whatever she wants, and there's also another kid whose name is just the child, so it's an unnamed narrator, and it's a kid that really goes under the radar. There is nothing like spectacular or flashy about this child, but at this school, the kids start to create this hierarchy, and there is violence, and there is really mean things going on, and the child starts to write these threatening sentences in people's notebooks, and then something really terrible and violent happens. We then flash to the point of view of a teacher, and the teacher wakes from this really intense dream, and it appears that she has been teaching this class, but way back in her past. I think that's how it works. I'm not really quite sure, but it seems very apt that the title of the book is The Impossible Fairy Tale. I also have Vengeance is Mine, All Others Pay Cash by Eka Kurniawan, who is an Indonesian author. This book was translated by Annie Tucker. This is about a Javanese young boy who is kind of a lower social class. His name is Ajo, and he has witnessed a really terrible sexual assault. And after that event, he experiences a lot of trauma, and he has a lot of issues that he is grappling with sex. He then turns to fighting as a way to cope with all of his trauma, and he is hired to kill someone called the Tiger. But he falls in love with Itang, who is a female bodyguard who works for the local mafia. This book has high-speed car chases, there are issues of gender, assault, and trauma. I have another book by Eka Kurniawan, also translated by Annie Tucker. This is Beauty is a Wound, and this talks about a sex worker whose name is Dwi Ayu. She lives in Indonesia, and she and her 4 daughters experience repeated assault and violence, so they are in a really terrible situation. It also discusses the colonialism that's going on in Indonesia at this time. There is some political upheaval, and they have a new president. There were a bunch of mass murders in 1954 of communists. Again, like I said, there is a new president, but he runs a really authoritarian regime, so there's also talk about politics in this book. I've heard that this book is just absolutely heartbreaking, so I would really, really like to read it. I also have an anthology of short stories called Welcome Home, which is edited by Eric Smith and has a bunch of YA authors who are all writing stories about adoption and foster care and teenagers that experience those things. The next book that I have, I am so excited for. This is A Long Black Veil by Jennifer Finney Boylan. Jennifer Finney Boylan is a trans woman, and the main character in this book is also a trans woman, and she discussed in an interview how she pulled experiences from her own life and kind of incorporated them into the main character, but the character is very much her own person. So it is kind of like a murder mystery, but on the other hand, it's also kind of like a case study about the main character. She also said in the interview that in her own life she has had to hold on to a bunch of secrets, and she wanted to kind of play on that in this book. So instead of being like a whodunit, she says that this book is kind of like about how different people hold secrets and how that can lead to like certain outcomes. My next book is actually a book that I have on my tome topple TBR because it is very large and very heavy. This is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. I've also heard a ton of high praise for this, but we start off the story in the year 1945. There is a 16-year-old girl named Catherine. She is pregnant, and she's being admonished by her church because she is pregnant. We move forward 7 years, and Catherine's young son Cyril is growing up in Ireland, and he identifies as gay at this time in Ireland where it was illegal. So he falls in love with his best friend, and we just kind of go through his experience and his life. I've heard that this book is written really beautifully, and even though it is really large, I've also heard that it moves really fast. So this is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. The next few books that I have to show you guys are all published by Europa. If you guys have not heard of Europa, I've been a fan of them since before I started BookTube. They publish amazing translated works, and they also publish books by authors that are not from the US that are also set outside of the US, which are all things that I absolutely love. So the first book that I have from them is called The Gringo Champion by Aura Zalonen. She's a Mexican author and she wrote this book when she was 19. And y'all don't even want to know what I was doing at 19, but it was most definitely not writing published works. So this is the story of Liborio, who is a Mexican boy and he is an undocumented immigrant in the US. He has a lot of anxiety symptoms, so we go through his experiences and he is witness to a lot of violence, but he is able to get a job at a bookstore, and there he falls in love with books and literature and fiction and all that good stuff while he is trying to learn English. Apart from books, he also grows really fond of the sport of boxing, and I was reading an interview with this author and she explains how her own experience growing up in a Mexican family ties into what she wrote in this book, and also why she decided to write about a boy who falls in love with boxing and books, which is so cool. I also have The Pathless Guy by Chiatali Sen. This is about John and Miriam, and they meet and they fall in love in college. However, this is a place that is an unnamed city. So in this city, there is a government and there is a lot of upheaval in the government, and in the government, they do not like people who protest or go against them in any way, and Miriam has been accused of an anti-government crime in which she has no appeal. So we see her and John's journey throughout that trial and what she experiences. Chiatali Sen was also born in India, and then after that she moved to Austin, Texas. Next I have Sergio Y by Alexandra Vidal Porto. We have a man whose name is Armando, and he is one of the most renowned therapists in Sao Paulo, and he has a patient whose name is Sergio. Armando finds that Sergio has abruptly up and left and now lives in New York, and he also finds out that Sergio now identifies as Sandra and as a woman. Armando really wants to find out what happened and what Sandra's journey was through therapy with him. Then I have Return to the Dark Valley by Santiago Gamboa, who was also the author of Night Prayers, which is a book that I read during the time when I was not on BookTube and I really enjoyed. Santiago Gamboa is a Colombian author, and this book does take place in Colombia. It's kind of like an indie noir type mystery thing with a really multifaceted, complex set of characters whose lives all interweave, and Night Prayers was like that too. A few characters from Night Prayers also show up in this book, and I really enjoyed that one, so I'm definitely gonna get into this one. Next I have The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This book is beautiful. Do you guys see this? Like, it's absolutely gorgeous. So this is set in 18th century in Cairo, and we have our protagonist. Her name is Nari, and she is a woman who can do a bunch of things like palm readings and healings that are really just a sleight of hand and a skill that she's learned, and not really a type of magic. So during one of her acts that she's performing, she conjures up this djinn, and this djinn tells her that there is this faraway land that's full of treasure, creatures of fire, and ruins of human metropolises, and this is a land that is a magical world and he can take her there, and it's a city of brass called Daivabad. Together they go to this world, and they are 6 different djinn tribes. There is a lot of political tension and really like dark, deep-seated resentment politically. That sounds like absolutely amazing, and this book is just beautiful. So this is The City of Brass. Next I have a thriller called Lies We Told by Kate Holohan. This is about an author whose name is Liz, and Liz has 30 days to get her own mystery thriller back onto the best-selling books list. Her husband is meanwhile distracted because his best friend Nick has gone missing, and then Nick's body is dragged from a body of water, and Liza's husband is implicated for his murder. Next I have The Guns Above by Robin Bennis. This is the first book in a series, and there are 2 nations called Garnia and Visalia. They are neighboring nations. They have been at war for a long time, but during this time women were never allowed to take leadership positions on the airships that they are battling with. They're only allowed auxiliary positions. But there is a woman named Josette Dupre, and she saves her airship in combat, and she is promoted to that airship's captain. But her crew doubts her expertise, doubts her skills. There's also like a really creepy, shady guy. He's involved in gambling, he flirts with all the women, he's really inappropriate with all the women, and he likes to nitpick at every one of her mistakes and her weaknesses, and she does make mistakes since this is her first time being a captain on an airship, and he is just really terrible to her. So the other nation, Visalia, does make a large military move, and Josette has to take her crew and her airship to victory. Next I have 12 Days by Stephen Barnes. This is a paranormal thriller, and fun fact, Stephen Barnes is actually the husband of Tananarive, who wrote Joplin's Ghost, which is a piece of speculative fiction that I talked about in my autumn book recommendations video, which I will link up there in the card if you're interested. She's an awesome author. She writes a whole bunch of speculative speculative fiction that is amazing. But this book is set in Atlanta, Georgia, and a whole bunch of leaders and notorious criminals are mysteriously dying. There is also a terrorist threat of some event that is going to take place in the future that could be really catastrophic. We have a mom whose name is Olympia, and she has a teenage daughter and a son whose name is Hannibal, and he is diagnosed with autism. And then their across the street neighbor, Terry, who is an ex-Special Forces soldier. He's carrying out a heist that will right some sort of injustice, and Terry and Hannibal together go to this martial arts place where they meet a woman whose name is Madame Gupta, and she teaches them some skills that could potentially right a lot of wrongs in this society. And the last book that I'm going to show you guys is Tomorrow's Kin by Nancy Kress. So in this book there is a spaceship with a bunch of aliens. They have just landed in New York, but they refuse to come out of the ship because they can't breathe or do anything because the gravity and the atmosphere are totally different here on Earth. We also have a woman who is a badass lady scientist working with the human genome. Her name is Dr. Marianne Jenner, and she and a couple of other scientists and some people from the UN are all taken from their labs, and they are shipped to New York by the Secret Service to try and communicate with these aliens, because these aliens are planning something really terrible that could really wipe out a whole bunch of humans. So their job is to try and, I guess, use their research to try and stop the aliens from doing so or coming to some sort of deal. So that is everything. That is all the books that I've accumulated over the past few months. Leave me a comment down below naming the book that you think is the most interesting that I have in my haul here. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!